Okay, here you are. Thank you very much. So, we're going to begin this last round table. From when we're in Paris or in Berlin or in Warsaw, we all have the impression that everybody in the world is thinking as the Westerners do, and that everybody is fighting against the Putin war. It's not true at all. At least 60% of the world has a different position, is supporting Vladimir Putin, or at least wants to stay neutral. So to explore these alternative visions, well, at least different visions of the one of the United States and Europe, we have two big speakers. The first one is with us from video conference and from Beijing, Mr. Yiwei Wang. Thank you very much first, because I know it's very late for you in Beijing and you have a kind of jet lag being with us today. You're a professor at the Jean Monnet Chair and also at the School of International Studies, and of course you will be with us for explaining to us the Chinese view. And Nico de Pedro, thank you also to be with us. You're a fellow professor at the Institute for Statecraft in London and a specialist of Russia and of hybrid threats. And you will explain us the views of Latin America. If I may begin with you, Professor Yiwei Wang, in an article published last week in Foreign Affairs, you mentioned a Sino-Russian syndrome, meaning that both countries, one of the main goals of the association between Russia and China was to deter the United States. You also said in this same article of Foreign Affairs that according to you, the Russian thinking is spatial, linked to territorial extension, and the Chinese thinking is, on the opposite, is temporal, linked to a civilization of 5,000 years. So my question would be, can you elaborate on these two very interesting concepts? And if I may resume my question, it would be, how strong is the association between Russia and China?
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir, bonjour, mesdames, messieurs. I'm very happy because I never traveled abroad in the recent 3 years. I really hope I can attend in person to meet you, to talk to you more freely and in deep. The question is about China and Russian relations. Most of the Chinese actually difficult to make the comparison of the Soviet Union and today's Russia, or Caesar Russia in the history, which took more than 1.5 million kilometers of territory from the Qin dynasty. Many Chinese confused of the three of Russians. So there are many Chinese actually they're pro the West, pro the US. They think about US is a beautiful country in Chinese. They have a bad feeling about Russia in the history. But today, today's Russia maybe is different with the history. So the Chinese feeling to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there are 4 stages. The first stage actually is very angry and astonished about because it's the Olympic Games in Beijing. 2008, when the opening the Beijing summer Olympic Games, there also was a war, Georgia conflict with Russia. But now the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing, also the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So Chinese very angry about that because Olympics means peace. But later, the Chinese attitude towards this conflict a little bit changed. They are more sympathy to Ukraine because China is a 5 permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, jointly together with United States, Russia, UK, France, to provide security guarantee to Ukraine after the Ukraine independent from the Soviet Union. So, but now Ukraine was suffered so many conflicts and so many casualties, and also Chinese investment in Ukraine lost lots of money because we use the EPC model. Ukraine actually economic quite poor and corrupted, and so difficult to get the profits returned. And then bomb the subways and the ports which are built by Chinese. So loss of money is lost. We were angry also for that. So the second stage of the sympathy to Ukraine people. Later, Chinese, maybe the third stage is felt sympathy to Russians. So they understand that this conflict is not between Russia and Ukraine. Maybe it's between Russia and the West, particularly the US-led NATO. So Chinese now may begin to feel sympathy to Russia. Maybe think about Russia is a rebellion to the unipolar world of the West. The NATO expansion make the Russia's maybe strong response for that. So that's the third stage of the attitude. Then the fourth Chinese attitude a little bit changed. They recognize that this is a proxy war between Russia and the West. The West sells so many weapons and even volunteers, armies. So this is a long war maybe. We hopefully maybe in the winter when the Europeans need the gas and oil from Russia to stop this war. So definitely we hope that the war will be stopped sooner, better. And then we will actually can do business both in Russia and with Ukraine. And China will also ready and help to actually after the war that we build the economy and the infrastructure building. China actually has leverage and advantage in doing so. Many China-Europe Rail Express pass through Ukraine now stopped or changed the direction. Also, it's not good for the Chinese Belt Road Initiative. So that kind of fourth stage of the Chinese attitude to this special military action of the Russia. Now, many questions about China and the Russians' relations. Actually, we need to get it right. Firstly, China and Russia, their relations, we call this is a new type of great power relations. It's not allies, because both sides actually highlights the independence, and we are not want to be just join your side, because both sides, either Russia and China, think about we are a big power, and we need independent foreign policy, and so it's not target a third party, and also, but it's a deterrence maybe to the NATO, the US, when you push either of Russia and China to the corner, maybe they can closer on relations. So that's the saying of the so-called no limitation, but this means it's deterrence. Actually, they have the umbrella of the foundation of the UN Charter. So this kind of China-Russian relations. China also, many Chinese are very angry about, not just because of the Winter Olympic Games, but the special military actions actually make Chinese very astonished, because we didn't know this before. So China withdraw our students, workers, overseas Chinese very late. So even myself as a scholar, I think the so-called the war is a joke. Even the President Biden warning Russia will use the force. The Chinese already laughed that this is just a deterrence, but finally happened. So maybe Chinese intelligence is very poor. Maybe and China is very too kind. They cannot imagine there was war. So, but China and Russia actually is a comprehensive strategic coordinator. What is the meaning? So-called actually coordination, strategic coordination is more about the UN because we are permanent member of United Nations Security Council, and about the global strategic stability. Also, is about like Syria or the Middle East and many hotspots issues. But each side, either Chinese core interests or the Russians core interests, which is more mutual support, but not too much strategic coordination, which means Russia think about Ukraine is their core national interests, whether the use of force not necessary or no need to coordinate with China. Russia's military is big enough to deal with, to handle Ukraine issue, and vice versa. And China also think about if Taiwan declares independence, we can handle. It's not necessary to ask Russia to join us. So of course, support is very neat, but we cannot just rely on others to support you, because this is the core national interest. You cannot give up. But why so many questions, so many eyes on China? I think the first reason is the West looks down upon to Russia. They think about Russia without Renaissance. The culture is not true European culture. Even Russians think about they are Europeans. Even many Chinese think about Russia as European country. Russia is a mixture of the Eastern and Western culture. So it's Russia think about it. Russia is the winner of the World War II. So every May night they have the military parade, but the West think about it, they are loser of the Cold War. So that's an asymmetric perception. And so the West think about without China's support, Russia cannot continue the war. But this is totally misperception. Russia is so huge. Russia's military is so strong. There's no need China's support in dealing with Ukraine, as I mentioned. And also about put the so-called Russia-Ukraine conflict model to Taiwan, which makes the Chinese also very angry, because Taiwan is part of China, which were, according to 1971, the UN resolution of 2758. So majority, actually nearly all of the member states of UN recognize Taiwan as part of China, which is totally different with Ukraine. So when the US actually they think about China as a strategic adversary or competitor, they are more concerned about the US alliance systems in Asia Pacific. So they have a narrative war to portray China will follow Russia to in Taiwan across Taiwan Strait. Actually, 2014, the first Ukraine crisis happened. I published an article saying very clearly China will not follow Russia for three basic reasons. First, China is actually a stakeholder of the globalization. We are very much economic interdependence with the Europeans, with Americans, which different with Russia, only energy, too much linkage. China is a world factory. Second, China is more self-confidence about the future. So we are the student of the Sun Tzu, the art of war. We will solve the problem of Taiwan without using force. It's just deterrence. Third, I think most importantly, fundamentally, the Chinese DNA culture is different with Russia. China, we say, proud of the 5,000 years of the civilization. The logic is more for timing, but Russia is more for space and spatial dimension. It's like the answer of the Russia is thinking of our territory is so huge, so large from the Pacific to the Atlantic. So China is different logic, different DNA of that. In the past 4 decades, China never used force, open reform. So China needs peaceful environment for the rise of China and great regeneration of China in the history of that. So that's basically, I think I want to share with you at the beginning of how Chinese, majority of the Chinese views of this conflict, the fourth stage. The second, we should get China and Russia relations right. We cannot just understand of the China and Russian relations as so-called the dictatorship of the democracy or dictatorship is so naive, or imagination of China similar with Russia, different. So finally, I think what China can do, firstly, I think China against any sanctions. The sanctions means you own the world. You will punish anybody if you not follow you. So the word is very controversial. It's not either or. You join my side or against my side, against us. You are wrong history of the wrong side of the history. No, I don't think they are like India also not join the sanction, but still they are Indo-Pacific strategy, and they are also good relations both with Russia and with the West. So the sanctions, the legal organ of the sanctions should be endorsed by the UN Security Council. But of course, China and Russia, with the veto power, you cannot pass. So the sanctions are actually according to the UN Assembly, General Assembly, but this is not the legal organ to make the decision to impose the sanctions on any sovereign states. But the sanctions is from the Western domestic law. So this enforce China to join these sanctions also unfair. Even China against the sanction, because any sanction is a double-edged sword. But China not violate the sanctions actually. China do normal business with Russia, but not violate, not sells weapons, not technology of semiconductor, anything. So actually China is quite honest and good to keep their promise actually. But American companies, Indian companies buy more oil from Russia. China is do the normal trade with Russia. So in the future, maybe China can play a more important role, not just the ceasefire between you and NATO with Russia, of course, Ukraine with Russia. But later, China can play some role because we hope that we can back to the Helsinki spirit 2.0, indivisible security, which you make the promise with Russia, with NATO, with US and Europeans. Russia is your neighbor of the Europe, most of the European countries. You cannot make a choice, even you don't like or not, that doesn't matter. So we need, actually we echo some American, European saying that European security cannot target Moscow or cannot bypass Moscow. So finally, maybe in the future, you can make some security arrangement according to community of the shared future, maybe with Russia. And then they can have a stable Eurasia or Europe, so which China really hope can do something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just before to give the microphone to Nico, I just want, if I may pursue a little further, I just want to think, it's a very small question. What was the reaction in Beijing when some Russian leaders, well, there was Putin and Medvedev and also Lavrov, threatened the world threatened to send a nuclear, a tactical nuclear arm in Ukraine. I mean, at this point, was there the feeling in Beijing that Putin was going too far or not? Very small answer.
1964, the first Ottoman bomb successfully in China. China declared that the 3 no's principles of the nuclear weapons: no first use, not used to any non-nuclear countries, and so nuclear is just a deterrence, a last resort. Finally, we should give up all the nuclear weapons, and then the world will be more peaceful. So nuclear are very limited in China. So we think about Russia wanting to use nuclear at the beginning. That's a deterrence for to limit the war only between Russia with Ukraine, maybe even proxy war, So no direct conflict between NATO and Russia. That's the end of the war, end of the world. But now the technician nuclear weapons, Russia want to deterrence to use, or maybe because conventional weapons from the Russian side quite poor, cannot compare to NATO. So Russia has no choice. Maybe they have more technician nuclear weapons. Of course, the U.S. has nuclear technician nuclear weapons in 5 European countries: Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, maybe some other countries as well. So this time when Finland and Sweden joined NATO, actually, if the portrayal of the nuclear weapons facilities of military equipments, which make the European security future is more in danger, we definitely also against.
Thank you very much. Nico de Petro maintenant. So what's happening in Latin America? What is the mood towards the war in Ukraine?
Okay, so thank you very much. And first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for having me. I'm truly delighted and honored to be part of this conversation. And I'm sorry that Professor Wan cannot be here physically. I feel more the pressure being alone, like sort of a prime minister or something here at the stage. But it's good. No, of course. So, about Latin America. Okay, the first thing is that normally Latin America is not united, so there is a divided region, so they don't act as a region as such or as a unified actor. And the war or the Russian invasion of Ukraine has not been an exception to that rule. And let me start first saying one comment about Latin America. So it's not a region from that perspective, and is often ignored or neglected or forgotten from the West. That's very common, and I think it's a strategic mistake because Latin America is critical for, or it's part of the critical mass that we need to uphold this rules-based order and this multilateral approach, or or keeping the multilateral fora in good shape and health. And unlike what we do as the West, Russia and China, and also Iran, pay a lot of attention to Latin America, and they devote significant efforts to Latin America. Because from their perspective, and from Russia, there is an initial trip undertaken by the famous Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yevgeny Primakov, in 1997. He very quickly realized that Latin America was an area of significant relevance to create what the Russians are pursuing of this multipolar reality or world. And for China, it's part of this, what they call, and Professor Wan, I think, was referring to it, this global south. And it's problematic because this global south, or this multipolar world, is basically, I'm sure he will disagree, but I think it's like that, it's basically constructed against the West, or there is the global south and there is the rest, yeah? And that's also problematic from a Western perspective, of course. So the response to the Ukrainian invasion. Okay, so there are different ways to look at it. I think it's misleading if we pay attention or we pay too much focus on the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations in early March, because there was, well, it was a defeat, let's say, for the Russian views, and no any Latin American country voted in favor of Russia. So Russia was widely isolated, let's say, from that perspective. Only Cuba, Bolivia, and El Salvador abstained, and Venezuela did not vote, etc. However, I think that, as I said, to pay too much attention to this particular voting, of course, is relevant, but I think because it's so obvious, yeah, that what Russia did was a gross violation of international law, so it was very difficult even for friends of Russia to support Russia when tanks are crossing the border and trying to reach Kyiv and destroying Ukrainian cities. But basically, the big players in Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, are playing with the, or toying with this idea that they are neutral. So meaning that they are not in favor of the Russian invasion, but they are not. But they are not either siding with the West. So, and this is interesting because it's basically this narrative or these views that Professor Wang was sharing with us. This idea that basically NATO pushed Russia to act against Ukraine, that everything was related to NATO expansion and is basically the West's fault. Yeah, that the West is pushing too much, so finally push or force Russia to react against that. This is very much the kind of views and perceptions in the region. And the kind of framing of the issue in the region is very much the Russian one. It's very predominant, much more than the Western one. And this is built up or constructed upon, well, local feelings and resentment against the West, in particular to the US, but it's also part, or it's also related to the fact that Russia is investing massively in spreading its views across the region. And to do so, I will refer a bit to RT section in very briefly, don't worry, anyone, don't worry. RT in Spanish, RT en español. So the Spanish version of Russia Today. And the channel is very interesting because in many occasions is the second or the third most shared source or media across the region. And across the region is a mainstream media. It's perceived as, well, actually it's perceived as a media, which is not, but it's perceived as a legitimate mainstream media that is like BBC, CNN, Deutsche Welle, or any other one. So, and they have been broadcasting since 2009 and investing significantly and massively in this 24/7 broadcasting, because from their perspective is basically they are addressing a potential audience of 500 million people, including around 50 million people in the US, and this figure will expand, will increase in the years to come. And it's very interesting, the channel, because it's very much ideologically biased. So it's basically addressing or targeting or promoting the views of the so-called left Bolivarian, so these left-wing views, and very much anti-US, anti-West, Western kind of narratives and perspectives. This is basically it, and they are very good in some occasions, so they are very effective. And so, well, and they claim that they have a massive audience and viewers across the region. They say the last claim is that they have like 20 million viewers a daily basis. It's difficult to verify these figures or to say this is true or accurate or not, but what we know is this is massive. And why is difficult to measure? Because they spread the content through many different ways, including partnering with hundreds of local cable TV providers, and also through social media, where they really play a very significant role. Particularly when there are times of crisis. I'm sure that my friend and colleague Alex Romero from Constella tomorrow will refer to some of these crises, because when there are riots and serious crises in Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, etc., then RT en Español or RT in Spanish plays a very central role in shaping the views, in terms of reaching out to a super large audience. So they are very, very effective in terms also of creating the audiences over time. And then when there is the crisis, so they are effectively reaching out to these audiences. And this is, well, important or extremely important, because basically these views, this framing, these narratives are the ones that are being massively consumed by local audiences. So if they already have historical grievances against the West, and they are also receiving very negative views about everything else that is happening today about the West, well, it's not surprising that they have negative views about the West at large. And when it comes to Ukraine, Ukrainian views are mostly invisible. Only the Chilean government, Boris, has been very critical or strongly condemning the Russian invasion. and the previous or the former president of Colombia, Ivan Duque. But let's see what happens now with the new one, with Petro, that just recently was sworn in. So let's see. But the region is very much, let's say. So I will conclude with this to be very brief, honestly. Just to look at this voting at the UN General Assembly will create the false impression that the region is very critical or strongly condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's not the case. They are playing a very ambiguous role, and some countries clearly in favor. These are Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, which have very strong and close links with Moscow. And the big players, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, well, they are neutral at best, but clearly, being neutral when someone is invaded is actually somehow being in favor of the invader, honestly. But I would say that in terms of the views and positions, clearly are closer to Moscow than to the West. That's the overview about the region. Thank you.
And can you say another word on the fact that the United States could be a target from Latin America, and as far as I know, mainly from Venezuela, no?
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I think that, okay, art in Spanish, as I said, is too, so the narratives or the communication or the information coming from Russia in Spanish is very much biased in favor of this left Bolivarian, okay, views. Therefore, it's difficult, I think, in many cases for them to reach out to Spanish-speaking audiences inside the US. That many Latinos, as far as I know, are clearly not that sympathetic to that kind of view. So I think that could be a challenge for them. However, the Russians or in the Kremlin, they clearly think in those terms of reaching out to these audiences. So they are clearly a target. Sooner or later, they will find a way to target these people. And also they think in terms of demographics. Now we are seeing, yeah, that the Kremlin, they are like, they seem so enthusiastic and excited about the idea of this gathering perfect storm for autumn, yeah, of inflation, economic crisis, plus food security or food crisis in Africa, pushing thousands or millions of people from Africa towards Europe. So they also think on those terms in demographics, yeah? Thinking that, well, they learned that probably very clearly in the spring of 2015 with the so-called refugee crisis across Europe. It's not a surprise that they try to replicate this crisis in a lower scale, but last autumn in Belarus, 2021 or 2020, no, 2021, yes, last autumn in the border of Poland and Lithuania. So they clearly see that migration flows are a very effective tool or something that can be clearly weaponized and against the West. And sorry, I don't remember the name. The General Glenn Van Herk, so the commander of the North Command NORAD, say last March that there are more GRU officers in Mexico than anywhere else in the world. And that, I don't know, I think it's worrisome, yeah? If there are too many GRU officers in Mexico, that's not really relaxing. And it's interesting that Russia is positioning or gaining ground in areas like Mexico, the Sahel, Libya, areas in which different irregular, illegal flows play a so significant role, and in which, I mean, and these flows can clearly target and be, I mean, so dangerous and harmful for the West. So all this combined. But coming back to your question, and I finish.
Thank you, Nico. We have.
No, I just wanted to finish saying that this audience in Latin of Spanish-speaking people in the US will be clearly a target, and they will find a way to reach out to them.
So we have 10 minutes for your questions. If anybody, I can see no hand.
Well, that proves that I was right. It's Latin America is always forgotten and neglected. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Mister? And has Wei Wang disappeared? Or he's disappeared? Mr. Wang?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
you're
here.
still here? Okay, I don't see you anymore. But, okay, it's better. Okay, so we have a question from at the end of the... Okay. Ah, okay.
My question is for the professor in China. I'm just wondering if the unified response from the West to the invasion of Ukraine has made China think twice about its approach to Taiwan.
Okay. So you can answer.
Okay,
Yeah, you can. It's a question for you. Can you hear us? No, I think you don't hear us.
I can ask it again.
Okay, can you ask it again?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
yes, I have.
Okay. Go ahead. You can ask your question again.
Oh, ask it again? I thought you said he heard.
I got the question.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
so
you
you
did
can
get
answer.
it. Okay, I look forward to
Yeah,
hearing
yes,
your
yes, yes.
response.
As I mentioned in my presentation, so any comparison with Ukraine, with Taiwan, is very actually astonished and make the Chinese very angry. I say very clearly about that. China, actually, think about Taiwan. We have our wisdoms with both sides of either Taiwan and the mainland. We will solve our own problem. It's not just the use of military or so easy, no quick solution. I just make the comparison of Hong Kong. When 1949, the founder of the People's Republic of China declares any illegal treaty signed before, we are not recognized. So the British very worried about the PLA will liberate Hong Kong. But Mao Zedong during that time sent the order of the PLA army, stop, let Hong Kong to be itself. Even we are not recognized the Opium Wars, illegal treaty. So Hong Kong can be the bridge, connect China and the West. So UK actually is the first Western big power recognized People's Republic of China. So we think about Taiwan also. Taiwan in the future actually will be another important bridge to connect China and the US. So we think about a very long term, not just the use of think about twice. We think about 2 millions of times about our future. We will use our 5,000 years of civilization wisdom to solve our own problem, not impacted by anybody from outside of this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Pierre Lelouch. And then, I'm sorry. You'll be the next one. I'm really sorry.
Ça marche, hein?
Yes.
Professor Wang, with all the respect to your 5,000-year civilization, let me remind you that it is France, it seems to me, that recognized China first, but that's a detail.
France built the diplomatic relations first.
Yes, you
But,
said the UK did, yeah.
But not diplomatic relations, but
turning to
the recognized first.
Turning to the UK, you had a treaty signed with the UK which promised Hong Kong two-system situation. After 20 years, you just sat on that treaty. And now Hong Kong has no other system than the mainland system. So you may understand that it is maybe a little frightening for other Chinese living in Taiwan who don't want to be under a Beijing communist system. even though the community recognized, of course, that it's all part of the same country. So that's just a remark. I had one question for you. I listened very carefully to the fact that you said that you had no alliance with Russia, that you were both big powers, and that they did not need you in military operation and you didn't need them. But the Russians are going to need semiconductors. They need a lot of semiconductors to rebuild their military forces. The question is, the semiconductors, they are produced in Korea, and the Korean will not deliver. They are produced in Taiwan. Taiwan will not deliver, but they're also produced in China. Now, will you deliver semiconductors to Russia the same way you're buying a lot of oil that we used to buy here in Europe? We stopped importing, but what we stopped importing is now bought by you in China. So please answer that question on semiconductor. I think it's crucial to the conduct of the war.
Okay. You can answer now, and then I will take the last question. We listen to you, Mr. Wang.
Okay. Hong Kong and Taiwan, of course, one country, two systems, actually. At the beginning, want to practice in Taiwan. Taiwanese, to be frankly, majority today not accept. And then we practice in Hong Kong and Macau. But this initiative of Deng Xiaoping, one country, two systems. And then we negotiate with UK, hand over the sovereignty to China. But this treaty we signed with UK, of course, we say it's an international treaty which has the international legal rights. We should respect and follow that. But this treaty basically is about the handover of the sovereignty. With the smooth handover, many duties of this treaty, they finished their mission. UK, they cannot, because of this treaty, to use this to interfere domestic affairs of China, because Hong Kong is a part of China. So thus we should make very clear differences. About the semiconductors, even China also need, we're very worried about the US Trump administration, not just trade war. They want to also actually with the chops of the semiconductors. So semiconductor with the oil is different things. The oil and the gas, as I mentioned, is normal trade between China and Russia. China didn't buy more like Indians and Americans because of the war. Semiconductor also no any signal, or you cannot provide any evidence that China helped Russia about semiconductor. Even the US also approved that actually even China against this sanction, but China actually follow the Americans or the Western's sanctions to Russia.
Thank you very much. We have a last question.
Yeah, thank you.
Back.
Conrad Greilich, scholar from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. It's to you, Mr. De Petro. You talked a lot about Russia today's activity in Latin America, and there are European equivalents in some ways, a little bit structured differently, Deutsche Welle, BBC, etc. What should they do better? Is it just a number? Is it just a budget, or does there need to be any change how, like, the Western media conducts their business in Latin America? Thank you.
So thank you very much. Very good question. And I'm sure I don't have a good answer. It's a very good question. Because, well, to start with, the problem is that RT is not like Deutsche Welle, France 24, BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, or any other. It's basically not a media. It's conceived, designed, and used as a weapon. That's a big, big, big difference. Second one is that to address your question, is the dilemma that we are facing right now as democracies. I think that what we are facing is basically an existential threat, because strategic adversaries like Russia and others are now taking advantage of the open character of our societies. They are taking advantage of social media, the digital ecosystem, which is open and free, to basically to attack us from within, or to attack us from inside, and to neutralize us from within. This is what they are doing. And so far, I think we are getting close to have a good diagnosis, a good understanding, more or less a good, let's say, okay, to simplify it, a good understanding of the threat and the challenge that we are facing, but we are still far off from having a sound strategy to deal with it effectively. And your question relates to that. Definitely having more means and taking this seriously is part of the answer. I mean, a country like mine, so I can be a little bit critical about Spain, is not really broadcasting, is not taking this seriously, the Spanish speaking. So the Iran, China, and Russia are devoting more resources, more time, more efforts to address the Spanish-speaking audiences worldwide. But I think that's a mistake from the Spain side, yeah. But but apart from that, sorry, I don't have much more good ideas to address this, because it's a sort of a dilemma. Because in the context of Latin America, if undertaking a measure like the one, like the ban that has been adopted or imposed by the European Union, would be, well, impossible, but even in the case that it would be possible to do that, would be much more difficult, because a large audience or a large part of the population perceive this as a legitimate media, and is where they get the news. So that will be clearly understood or perceived as a censorship and imposing truth, or preventing the people from getting the kind of views or analysis that they like. So that would be super challenging and probably counterproductive. So it's an open question, but it's a critical question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Mr. Wang, especially because of the late hour for you. And thank you, Nico De Petro. I think you're free now. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup Isabelle, merci à nos participants, Nico, professeur Wang. Voilà,
Merci
nous clôturons
beaucoup.
cette première journée, et je vous remercie beaucoup de